Hello everyone, and welcome to this Motor Trade Radio Supplier Special with your hosts Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson.
Hello and welcome to this Motor Trade Radio Supplier Special podcast. This episode features Jigcar, the new startup AI-driven automotive logistics platform, which aims to help multi-site dealer groups and car supermarkets sell more cars while reducing their operational costs. Jigcar was launched in January 2024 by 3 former Cazoo employees, and here to discuss the business is one of those co-founders, CEO Elliott Perks. So welcome to the podcast, Elliott, at what must be an incredibly busy time for you and the business.
Hi, Curtis. Yeah, thank you very much for having me on, and hi, Phil, as well. Yeah, it definitely is a busy time, obviously launching only in January and bringing on our first sort of franchise dealers. So been an exciting first 6 months or 8 months now.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely. And you know, I've been watching what you've been doing and more recently, we'll get onto a little bit of that later. So firstly, as I say, you know, as Curtis said, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on. Now, obviously, Curtis doing the introduction there, you know, gave a little bit of background. Do you want to give us a little bit further background on yourself, Elliott, and you know, where you were before you joined Cazoo, which was the last role before launching Jigcar? Do you want to give us a little bit more about your background in general?
Yeah, certainly. So when I left university, the first thing I did was set up a business. It was a B2B software platform for universities to engage their students. That's still going. It's in sort of 18 of the top UK universities now, and I sold it for not very much at all a few years ago. And the next thing for me was always trying to find what the next business was, but I didn't really have anything on my mind. And a job role opened up at Cazoo, and in I guess pretty Cazoo fashion, I ended up sort of managing their logistics software team with zero logistics experience whatsoever or automotive experience. And in front of me was just this just clear software gap where cars were moving all around the UK and Europe at the time on spreadsheets and notepads. And we thought, with a couple of my team members that are now co-founders, there must be a business opportunity here.
And I mean, you touched on it a bit there that you know the experience with Cazoo, as you say, that heading up that logistics platform. Obviously, you know, in terms of leading you and your colleagues in terms of this founding Jigcar. I mean, was it that you just noticed that inefficiency and like you say, that what might be seen as a more archaic way of managing that logistics space?
I think it was a couple of things. I think one thing we noticed was once your entire inventory is online, you know, logistics becomes pivotal to how quickly you can turn over your stock. And it also becomes pivotal to the margin of your stock on a group level, because a movement can cost so much. And at Cazoo, what they ideally wanted to do was buy software off the shelf for this, you know, same as payments. You know, you don't want to be building that kind of software in-house, ideally. And we tried a couple of third-party solutions that cost an incredible amount of money, and they just didn't work for automotive. They didn't take into account trade plate movements, where you need a whole specific algorithm built around the fact that there isn't something in a truck. And at every step of the journey, we realized, right, there's nothing for automotive. It needs a vertical solution. And that sort of got us down the rabbit hole where we went and spoke to more traditional retailers that are operating that sort of hybrid offline online model, actually still selling cars from sites in person, and noticed that every group is moving cars. It's pivotal to how cars are being sold, but there's just a software gap for actually managing that effectively.
And we've mentioned co-founding Jigcar. Do you want to tell us a little bit about who the management team is and who's behind in terms of that investors, because you have very quickly expanded that management team, and there'll be some investors that the listeners will definitely know.
Yeah, definitely. So, my two co-founders, Rupert and Jackson, were on the logistics team with me. So I was a product manager, sort of managing the sort of product strategy. Rupert was a designer, and Jackson was a software engineer. So we had pretty complementary skill sets. But one thing we were really keen to do is bring on people that had, a lot of domain experience. We saw that was potentially one of the issues at Cazoo, was a lack of that like really clear retail experience. So we sort of have approached that in two ways. The first was by trying to find right from the off someone who could act as an advisor, who had that retail experience. So the first person we brought on, who's now our commercial director, is John Pollock, who spent years at Toyota and Nissan, and then later McLaren and Aston Martin, who really helped shape our understanding of the domain. And then also Simon Bottomley, who was COO of Hendy, now COO of Vindis. And those two people have been absolutely pivotal to us in understanding the market. When we went to raise money, the thing we really cared about before any sort of venture capital money was bringing in people from the industry who could understand the problem, but also help us as we would go through our journey. So that was the focus at the beginning of the raise before we talked to any funds at all. And we ended up with some great people in the industry, the founder of RTC and the founder of CarWow, individuals across different companies like Motorpoint, Aston Barclay, Hendy. So that was really, really important to us. And then once we had those people interested in the business, we then basically completed the round, which was just under £1 million, with a check from Concept Ventures, who are one of the leading early stage funds in Europe.
I mean, there's fascinating background there, Elliott, in how you put the company together. A couple of questions for you. Why Jigcar? Where does the name come from?
Yeah, it was initially called My Cargo with a K, but someone had the domain name mycargo.com, and they're a logistics platform called Cargo. And we were going to keep it, but then one of our angel investors has a marketing agency to do some of their content, and they posted a fundraise announcement saying, really thrilled to have joined My Cargo's fundraise, and they got the wrong company. Is at that point we realized, what, we probably need to change the name. And we spent quite a long time thinking about the name, and it's a horrible process doing it. But ultimately, when we think about logistics, we're actually thinking about how logistics powers the movement of your stock and what you can do with your stock. And we thought there's a lot you can do with the play on words of Jigcar around, the pieces of a puzzle, and thinking about your stock as pieces of a jigsaw.
Yes. Yeah, no, got it. Now, as co-founder, the three of you came together with that idea that you've explained. How did you take that idea to the next stage?
Yeah, it sort of started as a ridiculous idea at a Cazoo sort of work drinks event where we sort of touched on it and thought there must be an opportunity, and didn't really talk about it much. And then, we met in the pub, talked about it, became sort of from pub chat to sort of obsessed. And at the time we had full-time jobs. We'd actually, me and Rupert at least had left Kazoo, and we had different jobs, and we were basically trying to speak to people in the industry to understand, what the problems are, what a solution might need to look like. And we ended up speaking to the head of logistics at Motorpoint, who has since been really helpful with the business. And they were moving cars around all the time. They had some internal trade play drivers, and they were looking for a software solution to support with that. So we sort of did a pilot with them. Ultimately, we just didn't have the resource to be able to do it effectively. But that gave us a really good understanding of the market in terms of where the opportunities might lie across both, internal driver movements, but also third-party logistics movements. So we used that to basically as the first information. Then we started to go and speak to different dealer groups.
Yeah, and that's pretty impressive, having Motorpoint on board for the pilot. And that was before you signed up your first dealer customer, which was Glyn Hopkin. How did that come about?
Yeah, so at the beginning, as I said, we would try to bring on people with, retail experience. So before we'd raise money and even form the company, John Pollock came on board, who I mentioned is now commercial director, and he set up a couple of meetings for us to go and understand with different dealer groups how they're moving cars around and what visibility they had over logistics. And Glyn Hopkin was one of those, and we basically sat down with some of their leadership team and said, this is the vision we have for the company, and we had like a prototype that we'd designed. And to be honest, they actually said this wouldn't work for us. This isn't how we do logistics. This isn't how we think of things. That what might work for Cazoo isn't going to work for us. These are the problems we have, and we basically just said, great, can we build something for you? And they were very open to that. We showed them some designs that we came back to them with, and throughout that process also went and raised money, and that enabled us to build them a solid product, which we went live with in January as we closed the funding round, and that was our first customer.
I mean, that's an impressive turnaround. As we say, you only launched in January this year, but where are you now in terms of live customers that you've got on board?
Yeah, so we've got three of the top 50 franchise groups live. So Stephen Eagell, Perry's, and Glyn Hopkin. We've got a pilot about to start in a few weeks' time with one of the big Scottish groups, and we're at later stage conversations with a couple of other similar size groups and a couple of smaller size groups as well. So we're definitely at this point where over the past 6 months, it's like been building out the foundations of the platform, proving its value, even at an early stage, where now we've got a more feature-rich platform, which we're looking to push towards the market a bit more heavily over the course of Q4 and Q1 next year.
And I mean, you mentioned the platform. Let's, for the listeners, let's have a think about what Jigcar does. What would you say is at the core of the business, and what do your products actually do for one those early adopters and those that are onboarding soon?
Of course. So we basically think of our product suite as three slightly different products that are all intertwined. So the first product, which is the most mature and is the one that is live with the groups I mentioned, is our logistics management product. So when we speak to a group, typically they'll say, we struggle for visibility on all the vehicle movements that are happening across all our sites, across different resources, whether it's a third-party logistics company, whether it's a marketplace, whether it's an internal driver. And so our logistics management product enables a group to request, manage, track, and analyze all vehicle movements across all those different movement types across the entire group. So a sales manager will request a movement through the platform that will go to either the internal driver, and they use our driver app to complete that movement, and that calculates the cost, or it will go to their third party, depending on what their preference is, and the third party logistics company will update the status of the movement back in Jigcar, or it will go through to a marketplace, and we're about to launch an integration with one of the biggest transport marketplaces in the UK, which we'll talk about later.
But probably two questions as a follow-up there, Elliott, for you is, what is, how do you describe that gives you any sort of USPs to anything else that's currently in the market? And secondly to that, I mean, you do describe yourself quite clearly as not a transport provider or a transport marketplace. So how do you best describe what it is you do for the sector?
Of course. So yeah, I know I didn't mention the other two products, so I'll mention those as part of answering that question. But firstly, in terms of logistics management, what we see as logistics solutions in the market at the moment are essentially logistics marketplaces. They're companies that go to dealers and say, we will move cars for you through our marketplace of providers. But what we see in the market, and increasingly so, is one third party marketplace isn't going to be able to cover all the movements for a dealer group. It's most likely a dealer group is going to have a degree of some third-party movements, some internal movements on casual drivers or any potentially employed drivers, maybe even on their own transporters, though less so, and then also across maybe marketplaces too. So what we do in our logistics management product is sit across the middle of all those different ways within which you can move a vehicle and start surfacing data to you in terms of like how effective and performant your logistics is across all those different resources, which no one else in the market does. So that's our USP in terms of our logistics management product. Our second product is our stock optimization product, which we'll be launching in Q4. And we think this is pretty novel because, and this is the one we're most excited about, because this is basically saying, right, now you've got logistics management in place. Now you can see all the vehicle movements you're making across your different resources. You can manage them, your drivers, your third parties. You can see how quickly you're moving vehicles. Now let's think about when is the optimal time to move a vehicle and where is the optimal place to move a vehicle to. And so that is basically taking data and saying this is where a car should be, or this is when a car should move, making suggestions and allowing a group to make movements and really think about its stock from a group level, with the ultimate goal that you can turn over more stock with the same amount of working capital. Then when we come to our third product, which is essentially a transport management software specifically for the automotive industry, this enables dealer groups that have internal logistics functions, so drivers, trucks, and also third parties that are planning vehicle movements on their own drivers and trucks, to manage and optimize the utilization of those drivers so that you don't have 4 drivers doing movements that one driver could actually do in a day, for example, with the ultimate goal of reducing costs and increasing the speed of vehicle movements.
I mean, it sounds fascinating because clearly, I think we right at the offset of what you've been talking about earlier on is the inefficiencies, those vehicle movements that are moving between sites within a dealer group that one day a car will move from one site to another, and then a day later another car will move from another site that could have been picked up and dropped off, etc. So I know exactly where you're coming from with this one, Elliot. I mean, it's fascinating stuff, and utilizing that efficiencies and putting it into the AI technology, really, you can see for the sector where it will drive that optimization of efficiency and utilization of the best value, and inevitably, as you said right at the offset, saving money. This is about cost savings, isn't it, for the sector? So fascinating stuff. Well, after the break, we'll be looking at some more of the typical vehicle movement problems identified by Jigcar and how they are resolving them for the sector.
You're listening to a Motor Trade Radio Supplier Special.
Well, welcome back to this Jigcar Supplier Special on Motor Trade Radio. Now, Elliott, you've talked about some of the USPs that you have as a company, and I'm kind of interested in some of the feedback you're getting from your dealer customers. What have you, as a business, identified as the typical vehicle logistics problems facing retail groups? Certainly the ones you're talking to and the ones you're working with.
Sure. So I think that there are a couple of common problems that we come across. On the logistics management side, what we often see is groups know that cars are moving all the time, but because there is a disparate set of manual processes, which is the only way to manage vehicle movements without software, it's impossible to see how much you're spending, how often the car's moving, how much does it make sense to move those cars? Are cars moving back to sites they've already been to? Are they moving around the network 3 or 4 times? So one of the core problems is not having visibility, and us being able to bring that visibility to the group of every vehicle that moves and what's being spent and how long it takes. The other problem we come across as well is having a huge number of providers that are actually making vehicle movements, because it might have been that a group has taken up until this point a site-by-site approach where each site decides who their trusted transport provider might be. But what we believe is, and dealers are agreeing with us on, is actually if you've got a group level stock strategy, you also need a group level logistics strategy. And part of that includes, how am I going to move cars? And if I'm going to use third parties, who are my suppliers that I've agreed group wide rates with, and that I know are going to cover all of my different sites and can also report back to me efficiently about all the movements I've done.
I mean, you raise an interesting point there about that group-wide logistics strategy. Why is it important, and how do you go about supporting the creation of that?
So one of our customers, when we first started working with them, had tens of different providers that are all chosen at a site level, and that has like a number of impacts. Firstly, it can be very expensive because with every provider, typically you're costing on a move by move basis. So every movement is costed as it is requested. If that means you're going to spend like way more than you would if you can actually go to one or two logistics providers, agree group level rates with them because they know they're going to get a certain level of volume. So you're going to bring your ultimate cost down. So that can be really impactful. What you also can't do if you're operating on this site by site model, as well as losing visibility and spending more, is hold third parties to account as to how long it takes them to move vehicles between sites, because you're not agreeing SLAs with them typically. Whereas again, if you bring that to a group level, you're able to basically agree not just rates, but also cars should be delivered within, let's say, a 3 to 5 working day period, depending on the size and scope of the group. So that's on a third party basis. But on a general group logistics strategy basis, it's also about understanding what model works for me. It might be because of where my group is based and where my sites are, that it's much more cost efficient for me to leverage internal or casual drivers that are moving cars all the time between sites, because ultimately it can be cheaper and it can be much quicker. Or it might be that actually I need a hybrid of the two. So that's what we sort of try and work out with a group if they haven't got to that position already, is what do you want your model to be? Do you want it to be fully third party? Do you want it to be fully internal? Or do you want it to be a hybrid of the two? And then we just enact that through the platform so we can support any of those different models.
And just as a follow-up to that, Elliott, how are you actually working, as a new business, how are you working with those third-party logistics providers?
So we work really closely with the third-party logistics providers that our groups work with. We talk to them every single day. We've met all of them in person. We regularly sort of go see them. They actually use the Jigcar platform to receive movements and update the status of movements. And ultimately, as one of our products I mentioned earlier is that transport management software, we want to give tooling to the third-party logistics companies to plan vehicle movements themselves. So it's all within Jigcar, so we're covering both sides, which is great for the dealer group. But for us, working with a third party is really, really crucial, and a great supplier, a great transport provider is one that is willing to do that. But dealer groups, because they can provide so much volume, have the ability to say to third parties, I need you to be able to update the status of movements in Jigcar.
Yeah, fascinating, like you say, that one, the integration within the dealer groups themselves, no matter how large or small they are in terms of their geographical variance of coverage. But to your point there, that integration with the third party suppliers, giving them that visibility to be able to maximize for themselves with their dealer partners is fascinating. And I mean, we talk about the listeners of the podcast, and they vary from the small independent small dealers all the way up to your large PLC groups and your supermarkets in between, along many other listeners. And they'll be very interested to hear this about what you're talking about, that value proposition. I mean, how can you thinking about that logistical optimization, providing that positive impact, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier, and maybe we just expand on that a little bit further in terms of that, the stock turn, the reduction of operational costs, and improved ultimately that customer experience.
Yeah, so we know if you can move a car as soon as it should be moved at a certain trigger point, you're gonna, instead of it sitting on site for a day or two, obviously you've reduced a day or two in terms of its days to sell. And so one of the big benefits we've seen at Glyn Hopkin is we've reduced the days to sell by 1.2 days for all their vehicles that moved by just increasing the speed of vehicle movements. So that's like a pivotal thing. But what our optimization product looks to do is work out the best trigger points to move a vehicle. Some are quite obvious. Some are, a car's been invoiced from a site it's not at, it should move there straight away so that it gets to the customer as soon as possible and the car moves on. Others, depending on the rules that for a franchise dealer within which they operate, might be that if you represent Volkswagen and Nissan, if a Nissan part exchange comes into a Volkswagen site, it should move straight away to a Nissan site where the dealer group believes it's more likely to sell more quickly from. So there are certain optimizations that we look at. But we want to go a lot further than that and look at how do you look at your current stock holding and potentially move vehicles around your network to make sure they're selling. So, for example, idle stock. Can you look at your idle stock, compare it to, for example, Auto Trader's retail rating at different sites, see that it's got a higher retail rating at a different site, and then maybe move it to that site so that it turns over quicker, so it's not just sat idle on a different site. So it's those kind of like data optimizations that we're looking at.
And finally, Elliott, you've already talked about a new product in Q4. What else is in the pipeline in terms of products or aspirations that you can share with listeners?
Yeah, so for us over the next 18 months, it's really about nailing the logistics piece. So nailing our transport management software for planning vehicle movements as dealers and as third-party logistics companies, nailing our current logistics management product, and also launching the first and sort of second versions of our stock optimization products. So we're really going deep on logistics and the power it can have on increasing stock turn. That's really the core focus for us, and very much focused on the UK for the moment, but we'll also be looking at global expansion at some point, but we're not looking to do that too quickly. So that really is the focus for the next 18 months, to be honest, is going deep into logistics and focusing on how we can increase stock turn and reduce costs through the power of logistics.
Yeah, and that focus on how improved logistics can benefit stock turn, I think will resonate with a lot of listeners because that's obviously a key issue within the industry.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's so much going on at groups, and it's almost with logistics been a bit of a perfect storm where you've had COVID, you've had the more cars being surfaced online, still most not sold online, but at least surfaced and moving between different sites all the time, or being collected from customers' houses as part of private auctions. So logistics is fast becoming, or has fast become, like a very core part of operating a modern dealership. But typically, as with all these things, the customer proposition is a bit further ahead than the operational infrastructure to underpin it. And hopefully that's where we're stepping in and trying to add value to dealers that have a pretty tough time as it is day to day and don't need to be faffing around with logistics admin.
I mean, it's all fascinating stuff, and I mean, the question, what you got planned for the next 18 months? I mean, the what you've done already is significant, and the speed in which you're moving and introducing those extra elements, that extra solution and capabilities and to your platform. I mean, it is great information, great intel. So, I mean, all I can say, Elliott, is many thanks for joining us and really for sharing some fascinating insights on how your business is changing the way large dealer groups, both franchise and supermarkets, how they manage their logistical operations, and more importantly, to your earlier point, how that improves stock turn, how it adds, additional consumer experience to moving those vehicles quicker and more efficiently, and ultimately, that reduction in operational costs. So, huge thank you for sharing that with us today. So, if any of our listeners want to hear more about how Jigcar can help their businesses, what's the best way they can get in touch with you, Elliott?
Well, firstly, to you, Phil, and Curtis. Thank you so much for having me on. In terms of getting in touch, either email me, elliott@jigcar.com, or what's probably easiest is finding me on LinkedIn. So Elliott Perks, and go to the Jigcar page and just message me, and I'm very active there, and will respond. So yeah, that's probably the best way. And also on our website at jigcar.com, you can just book a demo directly on there too. So yeah, lots of options.
Well, Elliott, many thanks for joining us on this podcast, and good luck to you and the team on the rollout of these Jigcar services that you've outlined. So that's all for now. So many thanks for tuning in. You've been listening to a Motor Trade Radio Supplier Special with Jigcar.
Thank you for listening to this Motor Trade Radio Supplier Special, presented by Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson.